Hi, Gail. How's it going?
Good. Hi, Avi. How are you?
Fantastic. I know the last time we spoke, you were kind of in the snowstorm environment. I know the temperature is now rising where you are, so I hope you're enjoying some sunny time outside as well.
Yeah, it's going to get actually kind of hot this week. It's going to get, in the high 80s here. So it's just crazy. Up and down, like life, right?
Yeah, like life, and I think the up and down reference is probably kind of relevant to this conversation we're having because I want to talk to you today about impact and how we communicate impact and just general communication with funders. Over the last few years, this space of fundraising and nonprofit and for-profit and social impact organizations has evolved a lot. And the one thing that has evolved a lot is communication norms between funders or investors and organizations leading them. And so, one question that I have for you, considering you communicate with a lot of organizations and with a lot of funders, is how can organizations or social impact leaders create a strong communication channel between themselves and the funders that they're often working with? What are your best pro tips on that?
Oh my gosh. Well, I'm going to have to hear your pro tips because, as you know, I'm not a digital native, right? You and I are different generations. And so when I think about communications, I think kind of old school stuff, right? Like meetings in a coffee shop and, long walks or, and I'm not as familiar with some of the communications, and the portals. And, so I think you and I can sort of share some ideas here. But, uh, you know, the funders that really have the time, I think, and the interest to make themselves available are out there. I think there's a lot of funders, whether they're investing or they're giving grants, who want to know what's going on. But I do think that funders are like humans, right? They get busy and they have maybe some nervousness about exposure. And so communications for me should be informed, I think, overall by just the basic sort of norms of how you get to know somebody, right? And those norms of how you get to know somebody might bend in this digital age, but if we hold fast to patience, take some time, um, if a meeting goes longer than expected, that's okay, right? So some of those basic relationship talking norms, I think, should still be in place overall. I mean, that's just my first answer. What do you say?
And now, I mean, to be honest, I think you started by saying oh, I don't know these new things, but really, I think where we're going towards is actually a lot of that, right? Like making that human connection as core to your fundraising or outreach process as possible. Because I think what has happened is that people have gone farther and farther away, and part of that is probably because of the pandemic. We weren't seeing each other, and so we've leaned on these digital tools to do a lot of that communication work, to do a lot of that outreach work. And yet at the end of the day we are all humans behind these screens, right? And I think, as you rightly said, a well-written email, a well-written letter, and letters are still really really popular, can do a great deal of magic. But even more so, asking the funder to have a cup of coffee or taking a walk in the park is fantastic where possible, right? So I think what you shared is actually quite helpful there for sure.
Yeah, and
um,
I would also just elaborate on what you're saying in that there's this gap, right, between those who are giving money and those who are asking for money. And that gap can inadvertently create trust issues, right? Or it can be a cluttered space in between there. So I think too, by recognizing that the person you're talking to is a person, right? Like even if if even if your goal is to make a pitch to the funder and to get some money, I think be prepared to say, maybe I'm not going to do the pitch today because the conversation is going towards this person's conversation about COVID, right? Or something. I think, but it's tricky because funders want to have they need their money. So the timeline between needing money and giving money, as we've heard from some of our colleagues, can be at odds. But I think that that place of being at odds could be an opportunity for relationship building and communication. If someone says, I
For
don't have
sure.
the time, they don't have the time. Yeah.
For sure. And I think it definitely is. This is where it's helpful to also start in advance. I think a lot of the organizations we're working with, we talk a lot about how founders generally tend to be in this reactionary mode of like, I need money. I'm going to go ask for money. Give me money, right? Like literally step by step. That's just how it works. Whereas I think,
Right.
and that's perhaps because it's so stressful in this space that people are always like reacting to things and making things happen. And oftentimes because it's a crisis, like they're literally answering to crisis. They need that support right away. And at the same time, I think there's a little bit of that planning that can happen ahead of time so that you can start building a relationship 12, 18 months ahead of time so that when you feel like you're ready, and again, there isn't this advice is both helpful and frustrating because sometimes that money needs to happen or you need the funding in 6 months and or 3 months or even tomorrow. So it is difficult and sometimes frustrating and at the same time perhaps a smart strategy to start ahead of time, start mapping who do you want to talk to, start building that relationship. And then definitely I think investing in that relationship is quite helpful. A follow-up to that question though, Gail, that I did have, which was about that ups and downs that you just started this conversation with, is oftentimes organizations are communicating the ups, obviously the annual report and their Facebook and Instagram, they're talking about the ups, but the downs tend to be the space that generally is kind of in this like dark space, right? You're not necessarily trying to communicate. What's your advice to organizations on how they better communicate their impact, but also the areas where things aren't working? Is that recommended, especially when you think about like funders that are maybe reading that report, or do you recommend people to communicate their biggest failures to the funders that are funding that work?
Gosh, it's such a tricky question because, again, it comes back to this humanity part of us, right? And I would say that, I really like what you said about planning ahead. Maybe some of the initial conversations that you have with a potential funder are just a meet and greet, just like without the expectation that you're going to ask for money or get money, but just to get to know the person. And then as you develop a relationship over time that's based on some initial trust building, and then it might feel more comfortable to say, we're not perfect as an organization. Here's some things that we have stumbled across. And I've had the experience of knowing some, nonprofit leaders and some, new emerging change makers that, hearing about their missteps might be a little bit easier for the relationship and easier for them if it happens after we've gotten to know a little bit of each other. You know,
I love that advice. That's a fantastic advice. Is perhaps timing it and being smart. I mean, I think that's just a really smart strategy to like maybe take your time with it, maybe build that relationship, and then obviously that vulnerability that you need to like get out there and say, hey, these are areas that we have struggled with, or here are areas we're still working on. I think that's an important conversation to have. I know we're running out of time for this conversation, but I think we're going to try to make time for some more of these over the
yeah.
coming weeks. And so if you're watching this and if you're interested in following along, we're going to start posting more short, long form videos of these sorts. And hope you enjoy kind of listening to our chit chat. This is totally improvised, so it's kind of fun to do. And really appreciate all of you kind of following along our work. And if you want to learn more, check out our website, littlebig.fund as well. So thanks, Gail, for answering my questions and joining this pod. And I'll see you next week.
Yeah, it was so fun. I'll see you next time. Have a great day.
Awesome.
I like that we matched in our colors. Oh,
I know. Little Big fun colors. Awesome. Thanks,
yeah.
Gail. Bye.
Okay, bye.